This is Audible.
Blue Wolf Productions presents Robin Williams at Audible.com with Robin Williams and Harlan Ellison, Part 1.
It's no surprise that a writer with over 1,700 stories to his credit has a lot to say. My old friend Harlan Ellison met me in a studio near his home in L.A. and barely let me get a word in. But we had fun.
So how are you? How's Marcia?
She's wonderful.
Yeah.
She's safe and happy up in San Francisco. I just talked to her and said, "You're coming in the room." She said, "Brace yourself."
Listen, there are very few people in this life whom I hold in a degree of exalted awe, but she happens to be one of them.
Ooh.
I've been in your home, and I got to tell you, I mean, you've been in my house. You know what a wonderful place
This is the museum. It is more than a museum. It is like if you could take a human mind and make a building.
Turn it inside out.
Yeah, and that's it, basically.
We just built a walk-in.
I love your living room / cerebral cortex, the beginning.
Well, we just
put in
a new medulla.
You did put in a new
medulla. Abdullah Medulla. We put it.
What is your name? Abdullah Medulla.
Abdullah Medulla. And I am here from the Peace Talks.
Yeah, Medulla Oblongata.
We put in a walk-in pantry to showcase all my collectible drinking glasses. The 1939 Snow White set, the 1939 Pinocchio set.
I love the dwarfs too. Those shot glasses with the dwarfs.
They're little. They're
yeah,
wonderful.
but it's great for you, I'll tell you.
And
coming from a man who has you have Martian gargoyles.
I
on your
have
house.
everything.
You have your house. It's the one time I said I look over in the corner going, there is everything. On every corner there is a piece of art. There are little tiny, like the Wizard of Oz in one little tiny.
Yeah.
In one corner there's that. You have every comic book known to mankind on sliding drawers, in an airtight room. Well, it's not airtight. There's enough air just for
no,
you.
It's
hermetically sealed.
No, that's not hermetically sealed. I couldn't get in or out. No, it's temperature control.
I can't breathe. Welcome, I'm reading.
Temperature control and humidity control.
And Hasidically sealed. What are we doing? It's amazing. You have all of those stacked. They're like you could roll them back. You have every issue.
Stacked bookcases with one aisle. That's all it is.
And then all of those amazing paperback science fiction copies. Oh, yeah. The complete history of science fiction in paperback and hardback. But
I got 250,000 books in the house.
Don't tell people that. They'll be there.
Who would rob your house of books?
There are people.
Well, good. Let them come because you see, we have the machine gun nests
just on the top.
There really are. There are traps in the house. People get in. If somebody gets in that house inadvertently,
there are traps. There are things that will happen to them that will make them very unhappy. Because the way I figure it is, you come into my area,
you get it.
I'm going to take care of you. I went into Harlan's house. I just wanted a copy. Boom, he was gone.
No kneecaps.
No caps.
Listen, I've had people come to my door with knives. There have been two bomb attempts on me. There was a guy who used to, out behind my house is the watershed land out there.
Right.
There was a guy lying out one day, this is years and years and years ago before I married Susan. I caught a glint of light. Every time I passed through the kitchen, there was this glint of light. And I went out on the porch to look, and the porch is kind of shrouded by trees, and I could look out, and there was a guy lying out on the flat, out behind the house, with a rifle, with a telescopic sight. And I took him out.
You took him? How?
I took him out. Yeah, You know where I live. So
yeah.
What I did was I went down the street, all the way down to the bottom.
And then came back up
up through the woods behind him. And so I come up behind this guy, and he's lying there in the high grass with this. He had a Husqvarna 30-06 aimed at the house with a Bushnell scope on it, for Christ's sake.
Big hunting rifle.
And the only reason he hadn't taken me out was that the sun was shining on the house, and he was waiting to get a shot of me. You see, if I get in a fight, I don't care if I get the crap beat out of me if I can get off 2 good lines. 2 good lines, that's all I care. You understand what I'm saying?
This is the idea. It's like counting coup. If I can get 2 good lines,
2 good lines,
I have destroyed the white man. I have taken the white man down. If 2 good lines.
So I put the gun right in the back of his neck, and I do a great Raymond Chandler line. I say, "You move, I open another mouth in the back of your head." Now, is that wonderful? Is that Good
night, everybody.
So.
Then he drops the gun.
Well, here, I made him throw the rifle away. I took his belt and my belt, and I tied up his legs, and I tied up his arms behind his back, and I dragged him through the poison ivy all the way back to the house. Well, you've been in that Royal area.
Poison oak, everything.
Dragged him all the way back and left him lying in the front hall until the cops came. They took him away. He did something like 6-7 years.
Who was he?
This was just some neighborhood punk ass from Brooklyn
who'd followed you out.
What had happened was we'd had this silly card game, and I put up my Austin Healey, and he beat me, and he said, "Give me your car." I said, "Screw you! I'm not giving you my car. Here's $50. Go away, leave me alone." Well, he got so upset that he tried to follow when we left the house. He followed us on the on the shore, the Hudson, was it the Hudson, the Parkway?
Yeah.
And he had this VW, and he pulled up alongside, and he had a big beer bottle, and he stood up with the steering wheel between his knees and smashed it against the window of the car we were in, and he harbored this grudge against me. He got busted for something, and they sent him into the Army, and he had been in Vietnam. And now he was out of Vietnam years later, and he remembered this, and he sought me out. He found where I was, and he came to the house, and he scoped it out, and he was lying there, and he was gonna whack me. Wow, that's just one. That's it.
These are just one thing that happens to you.
A guy took a shot at me on the lecture platform in Billings, Montana.
When? How long ago was this?
Oh, well, it's before Susan.
This is the perils of being Harlan Ellison.
Well, I'll tell. Here's the amazing thing about it. When I tell the stories about my life, I say, this guy's got to be making this crap up as he goes along. Nobody could have had this many adventures. And when Susan and I got together, Susan and I had been together 15 years. We were married 14 years. Soon after we got together, and she was living with me, I did a speaking engagement. And on the speaking engagement, I told this anecdote about the guy who took a shot at me in Billings, Montana, when I was there speaking at Eastern Montana University. And Susan, she didn't say anything, but she gave me that look, the look that says, this is crap. You're making this stuff up as you go along. And I didn't say anything. About 5 years later, we're in Cleveland. It was a big celebration of Superman.
Right.
This is after they put together the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And we're in the Cleveland Convention Center, which is slightly smaller than Lithuania. And we wound up in a sub-basement somewhere, and we're walking along down this huge underground corridor, which was so wide, 8 semis side by side you could unload Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey.
That's what they're designed to do. That's
exactly.
The corridors to load the conventions.
And we got lost. We didn't know where the hell we were. And I thought, my God, they're going to find our desiccated corpses in September.
One little guy going, Amontillado, walk away.
Help me.
Help me.
Susan said, how are we going to get out of here? I said, I don't know. And as we're walking, it's like being in Shangri-La. From over in the misty distance, we see an escalator coming down. And on the escalator is a woman. And all of a sudden, the woman catches sight of us walking toward her, and she yells from a great height toward the ceiling, Harlan Ellison! Harlan Ellison! I said, listen, get behind me. Get behind me. Because
you sense that this was wrong.
The people who read my books are not entirely there. I want you to understand that. I love them. Nice people, but they don't...
Sometimes.
They don't veer that close to reality most of the time. So,
only as tourists.
And the woman comes running toward me. And she says, and she's panting, and finally she gets to us, a woman at about 40, and she says, do you remember me? I said, did I have your baby? And she said, no. She said, my name is, and she gave her name, and she said, I was one of the teachers who brought you into Eastern Montana University in Billings in such and such a year when they took a shot at you. And beside me, I heard Susan's jaw go clank. And what happens is I tell the most unbelievable stories that sound like that I'm cobbling them up out of nowhere, and somewhere along the way, someone will come out of nowhere and say, do you remember when I saw you bite that dragon's snout off and spit it into the python's ear? And so Susan has come not to doubt
she's
me
just
anymore.
like, oh, that. Yeah, that's that story.
Well, what's the weirdest thing ever happened to you?
The weirdest thing ever happened to a guy in Chicago. I did a concert at a club. A guy in Chicago put me in a headlock and wanted me to kiss his wife. Come over here and kiss my wife.
Is that really?
Yeah, they said, like, come here, kiss her, kiss my wife. And I'm going, like, come on, and then finally broke him away. But that was one of the weirdest things, and that was nothing compared to, who shot at you in Billings, Montana?
Well, they asked me if I would speak to a penology class at Eastern Montana University. I said, sure. When they took me to the class, it was at night. We're walking down the hall in to the classroom, and I see this bunch of thugs. I mean, it was the baddest looking bunch of people I'd ever seen. I mean, this is not West Side Story with the pastels. These guys they had no necks. Their heads sat directly on their shoulders. They had to turn their entire body.
I like you.
And I said to this woman who, years later is the one that we met in Cleveland. I said to her, my God, are these guys out on parole? She says, oh no, they're all cops. They were cops. They were. It was horrible.
And they're the most frightening people of all.
Oh, they were scary. And so I'm in the class, and when I tell them about how miserable kids are and juvenile delinquents and all, they loved all that. But the minute I said, I think we should do away with guns, all guns. Nobody has guns. Crooks, cops, nobody, no guns. That's it. They do very nicely in England without any guns. and there was this low animal whisper, and then somebody said something. They said a number, something like 514 or 628. I mean, it was a series of numbers. And so after the class, we're riding back to the motel. I'll tell you how small Billings, Montana was in that year. The motel had one of those big signs, you says welcome Kiwanis, It said welcome Harlan Ellison. That's
our only guest.
I was the hot item that
welcome
weekend.
Harlan Ellison.
There was nothing else.
We haven't had a group in a long time.
Billings, Montana. They were all, and everybody packs a gun. Everybody packs a gun in Billings. I don't
openly,
openly,
just walking around packing heat.
They're either wearing them in a holster, or they got them in their pants, or they carry a rifle. And there was one woman who was a sheriff from something like Chitlin Switch, Wyoming. I don't know, some damn town like that.
The first time in Chitlin Switch.
Bite my buck, whatever the hell it was called. And she says, "We shoot our meat." And I said, "Lady, don't hand me that crap." I said, "You go to the A&P like everybody else."
We shoot our meat?
We shoot our meat around here.
We drag it home, sir.
Yeah.
We're not afraid
please
to lead it.
Don't shoot it in public, please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I pull mine, madam, like everybody else.
Well, so we're in the car going back to the motel, and I said to this woman, and her husband was with her. She was an English professor, and I said, that number that they were saying, 513 or 612, what is it? She says, well, you don't really want to know what that means. And I said, what does it mean? She says, well, that's the number they use for the vigilantes. I said, vigilantes? What are you talking about? This was 1970 or whatever the hell it was, 1972. I said, what are vigilantes? What is it, the Oxbow incident? What are you talking about here? She says, no, this happens a lot. They take people out and they just beat the crap out of them, or they are found in a ditch somewhere. Well, that put me on my muscle. I got very nervous. I didn't sleep much that night. Well, the next night, when I went to do the lecture, and because there was nothing else happening in Billings, the joint was jammed. There's 1,500 people in the auditorium at the university, and I'm standing in the middle of that of a spot of light. You know that great scene in Mickey 1 where Warren Beatty is doing the stand-up comedy routine,
oh, yeah.
and he knows that the mob is up there in the booth, and they're watching him, and he's all alone in the spotlight, and he's very nervous, and he says, "Are you up there? Are you up there? And he throws the mic in one direction, he runs the other direction."
Did you do that?
Well, that's what I wanted to do, because it was pitch dark. I couldn't see a damn thing.
And that light's right in your eyes.
The light was right in my eyes. I've got the mic in front of me.
And the numbers going through the back of your head.
And behind me was a movie screen. They had a movie. They didn't raise the movie screen. And I remember this, as clearly as I can. And I'm telling the story of what happened the preceding night. And I'm saying, so I talked to these cops, and I said, blah, 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 and all of a sudden, bam, there's a blast of light from the middle of the audience, and the bullet, if he or she had wanted to hit me, no problem. I was standing right there in the light. They obviously were just trying to scare the hell out of me. The bullet went right past my left ear, and I turned around, and there was a hole in the movie screen. Went right through the movie screen. And the wonderful two things then happened. One was there wasn't a sound from the audience. Not a sound. Nobody moved. Nobody said, "Grab him! Get him!" They all sat there and let this guy put his heat away. Nobody bothered him. And I thought, well, if I look frightened, I said, I've lost the evening. So with the mic, I walked to the edge of the stage. It was a traveling mic. And I said, okay, now if the spineless yellow bastard who's hiding out there in the darkness wants to come up here and come out at me mano a mano, instead of being a little turkey shit and sitting out in the darkness, we will do a little dance. Come on up, you pissant. Where are you? Nothing moves. Nobody. And people were, oh, God. I said, okay. Now that we know who's got the balls and who doesn't, I will proceed with my evening. And I did 2 hours.
Whoa! Damn, Harlan.
Well,
high noon.
High noon.
Don't take that train to town. Damn. This is like...
I have never been smart enough to stay out of trouble.
My favorite thing was years ago someone wrote you that letter. You'd written something about a midget.
I get a letter from some joker. Call him Joe Calistoga, for want of a better name, and he says, "Dear sir, dear Mr. Ellison, you are always using." They always say, "You are always," like
every time.
1,700 stories, and you are always talking about midgets and dwarfs and midgets and making them villains and blah blah and blah blah blah. We don't like to be called midgets. We like to be called little people. So I looked through my oeuvre, my body of work. There's 1,700 stories, and I found 2 stories with a midget in them. In one of them, he was the hero, Big John Little. He was a midget. He was a midget who happened to be a private detective. And so I write this guy back and I say, "Dear Mr. Calistoga, I got your letter and I've looked at it and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, And I would like you to know that I'm 5'5". I am a little person. You're a midget!
That's what...
Hey, I know you. I'm not going to shoot at you, but damn it, I'll be there. 3 of us will drag you down. We know where you live. We'll be there at we'll be looking through your mail slot. I know you. We'll find you.
That's when I went... Well, the first time we had that benefit, there was a first benefit you had was in L.A. I came. It was for a libel suit.
Yeah.
You'd said something about somebody. I'm there. You had Asimov, Bradbury, Silver. It was the greatest names in science fiction.
Yeah, Stan Lee was there.
And they all were there, and it was for a benefit that you had libeled somebody. You said something, and you said...
But I was praising him.
You were, and he took it as libel. Because,
yeah, well, that's because he was a nutcase. He thought he was going to get money out of me.
Yeah. And
I will fight these people to the last tick of time.
It is...
It was a great night. You were funny.
Oh, it was a blast, though. I was there. I mean, to see Bradbury. I mean, it was everybody that I'd ever read. It was all in one room to raise money for you.
Yes, I am a fine...
For your legal foundation.
It was wonderful. They saved my... How shall I put it? My ass.
We're your ass. We will always be there.
Did I tell you the story about Meyer on his 90th birthday?
No.
This is a great story.
Okay.
You got to hear this story. Meyer's 90 years old, and he's hobbling down Beverly Drive to go to Nate and Al's. He's going to treat himself to a piece of flanken on his birthday. That's all he wants. He's got the walker. Suddenly, a car filled with his wild young buddies, they're only 80 years old, pulls up a Cadillac, and they say, Meyer, come here, Meyer. What is it? What do you want from me? Come here, it's your birthday. You're 90, we got to surprise you. No, get away from me, you guys. I know you guys. You're going to have a woman jump out of a cake. I'll have an infarct. I'll drop dead. Leave me alone. They grab him, they drag him into the car, they drive him all the way downtown to the Bonaventure Hotel. They throw him out in the reception area. They give him a gold key. They say, you see the guy over there with the epaulets, the maître d'homo? Go over to him. Tell him your name is Meyer. What do you, please, let me go. Just go. He walks, or he hobbles over to the guy, and he says, excuse me, are you the floor walker here? He says, yes. He says, I'm Meyer. He says, Mr. Meyer, we've been waiting for you, sir. Whisks him into a private elevator up to the top of the Bonaventure Hotel. They fling open the double doors, and there's a gigantic suite. The suite looks out. It's such a beautiful suite. You can see all the way to the ocean. Along one wall is nothing but a groaning board filled with food, not just Tex-Mex and deli and Chinese and Thai. There's Lithuanian food. There's Hungarian food. There's anything you could possibly want, and a gigantic Nova Beam television with the finest new films. I mean, really good films. I mean, important good films like Mission Impossible. We're talking Armageddon, Dumb and Dumber. I mean, the really important films. So
our lines are open, ladies and gentlemen.
Here's Meyer sitting on the end of the bed. He's got a nice lean corned beef on corn rye and a Dr. Brown's cream soda. Suddenly the doorbell goes off. He hobbles over to puts on a sandwich, hobbles over to the door, opens the door. There stands a 6'2" woman in black leather with 5.5-inch spike heels, and she's carrying a whip. And she says, are you Meyer? He says, oh, God, oh, yeah, what? Oh, what? She says, your friends have sent me. My name is Satanica, and I'm here to give you super sex. And he says, and the soup would be...
Ladies and gentlemen, I like this soup.
Isn't that a sweet... I love
very
that
lovely. That's what the old jokes work.
They work.
I love them. These are the ones. This is like, except for, that was with me in computers. I mean, with you in computers, you don't have them. You didn't, or maybe you have them now.
No, I'm still not on the
You're
internet.
still a Luddite man.
I'm not a Luddite, damn it all. I don't, I've got an Electrodex for my addresses. I use a telephone, not 2 tin cans with a wire between,
No, not the old one.
I got a car. I have 2 cars. I have a Geo, but I also have a 1947 Packard.
Yeah.
I'm by no means...
Just take a go around the town, then.
There's some, I think you should work, I work on a typewriter. Mm-hmm. I work on a typewriter, not even an electric. I work on a manual because an electric's too slow for me.
Serious?
I type 120 words a minute with 2 fingers, and I make no mistakes, and I produce a beautiful manuscript. That's the way I like to work. I've always felt you should work at the level of technology that best produces your art. Anything above that level is just toots and whistles, and I'm not interested in that. So I do my scripts and I do my stories on a regular typewriter, and it's a real manuscript, and I feel great about it.
We had this thing where you came to the bookstore, and it was like I gave you that thing, the computer vampire, and you wrote a great thing about an actual vampire computer, a computer that actually lives off blood. Where we pricked his hand on the computer, and the computer started to thrive on the blood of that.
The listening audience does not know that I write stories in bookstores' windows.
It's like basically a lap dancer in a bookstore. He comes in, they give him an opening line for a story, and he writes all day. Well, you wrote for like 3 or 4 hours, right? How long did you write that day?
No, I started at 9, and I finished at 5.
And he sits in the window of the bookstore,
right,
so people come by and look at a naked author.
And we.
It's like Amsterdam, except with a typewriter.
Well, what you didn't know was that I had shingles. I had developed shingles.
If I'd known that.
And I was sitting there in that store.
In the bookstore.
In the bookstore, in incredible pain, writing about something I knew nothing about.
But you did a great job, though.
Well, yes, that's true. I did. The only thing that's ever held me back is my humility.
Yeah. What about my fucking humility? People have said that. People say, "What do you know about my humility?" It was amazing because and you also had that game. They made a game of I Have No Mouth, But I Must Scream, and it won all these awards. My favorite thing is you went to address a conference of electronic...
It was the Computer Game Developers Convention.
Computer Game Developers Convention, and you went and ripped them another sphincter because they came in and...
They were pissed off at me. I won this award for the most outstanding game, and they said, how can this imbecile have won this game? He doesn't even know how to turn on a computer. How can he do this? And I said, because I'm smarter than the rest of you assholes.
It was like the guy paid, "We're giving you an honor." "Yeah, right, here we go. Sore winner."
They give you the honors, and a couple of bucks will get you a bad cup of coffee at Starbucks.
Yeah, come in there. "I'd like to trade in my People's Choice Award, please."
Yeah.
"Here you go. Here's a latte."
And people think that you're being calloused about it or smart aleck about it, but after a while, the awards really don't mean a whole hell of a lot. There's some that are nice. I got one from the blind from the Braille Readers Association, which was really nice.
That's lovely.
And it was presented to me by a blind girl, and that meant something. Or the Writers Guild Awards for writing teleplays. I've won 4 of those. Nobody else in this town has ever won 4.
4?
4 for individual solo work. I mean, like the gang that wrote MASH, they've won 4, 5, 6. But for individual scripts, I'm the only person who's ever won 4. And those are great because they're judged blind. So that means a great deal to me because it means I'm pulling the plow, I'm cutting the mustard.
Yeah, and you've been through every test.
Yeah.
You've gone to the inner circle.
It's like going to comedy heaven.
And there's Groucho. You certainly took a while. Nice to have you back. You remember, and Harper will be here in a moment.
Do you remember Lenny Bruce's great line where Boris Karloff goes to Bela Lugosi's funeral and he looks in the coffin and he says, "Bela, if you're putting me on."
My favorite thing is when he said, "You know what a flamenco dancer is? It's a guy applauding his own ass." It's like, that's where you look around and go, "This is nice. Ooh, what are you doing?" "Hey, my ass is so great."
You know, I worked with Lenny.
Serious?
Yeah, man. I was in Chicago. When I got out of the Army, I was editing Rogue magazine, and Lenny was just coming around, and Lenny was just starting to get hot. They hadn't yet started to bust him crazy, and he had 2 or 3 of those albums on fantasy, and I convinced
How
him
to Influence People and Talk Dirty.
Yeah. Oh, it was before that. It was the album where he's lying down having a picnic in the cemetery.
Oh.
And the other one where he's got the Ku Klux Klan guy and the Asiatic girl and the black kid. Vote for me on the. Oh, he's wonderful. He was wonderful, and I loved him. So I'd go down. So I convinced the publisher that we should do a column called Bruce Here. And I went down to Mr. Kelly's and I met him, and he said, "Fine." He said, "But I don't write, and I don't." I said, "Look, you just provide me with the material, and I'll put it in shape." Lenny would go off on a road. He would come back, and we'd get together, and we'd go and have some dinner. And he would reach in his pocket, and he'd pull out a napkin, and he'd pull out a table mat. He'd pull out, and he would write down the bits and the pieces, and I would assemble them. So I wrote all his columns for him.
That's wonderful. I found this book that there's a collected language that was like. I didn't know maybe his daughter and his wife had put it together, and I didn't know they just wrote headers, like just basically outlines, like Pope, like Religions Incorporated, but Pope goes out, and like these wonderful things, and then that night he'd fill them out.
All those columns are in that book. That's the one that his daughter did.
Oh, that was great.
It was wonderful days, and we hung out in Chicago and we rode around. He was a great man, and boy, they broke his heart and they killed him.
And the saddest thing for me was to hear when he was in court and he said. In essence, I just want to perform my material, but I just want you to, in essence, like me, to the judge, this one judge. And he wanted to be able to do his stuff.
Yeah.
Because his theory was that if he could do the stuff, the judge would love it. But he never got a chance to do his own material.
Never got a chance. And you know who it was who took him down?
He said, "I just want you to respect me." That's what he said. I mean, I think that's not verbatim, but it's close to that.
He got to the point where he wasn't even doing his acting, where all he was doing was reading from court transcripts.
Yeah.
It was horrible. The routine of Lenny's that absolutely floors me, because it's the most complete and perfect story one, is the comedian at the Palladium.
That's the best.
Oh, my God, it's heartbreaking. Where at the end, where he's crying and he's saying, they got Georgia Gibbs on the boys who went to Dunkirk, the boys who died. He said, what are you going to follow that with, an arm? A leper here, have an arm. Sophie Tucker doing her jams and jelly scenes. It was, and in the end, they
up the Irish.
Up the Irish. Now, take it easy. We had a few bucks, lend-lease. Don't worry about it. It's an amazing.
It's the ultimate bomb.
Yeah.
He's telling about the ultimate death, and that happened to him when he went.
Did it really?
I think he bombed it.
Oh, God, what a night. The references that he makes. I mean, I didn't know Susan is from England, and I would have to ask her. I said, Val Parnell, he was the booker at the Palladium? She said, yeah, he's very famous. And I said, so who was Julian Eltinge? And Julian Eltinge was this famous a female impersonator who wore these flaming red wigs, and in the end, with the booker was saying, "Don't worry, we're going to get you out of here. And somehow, by God, we'll get you out of the country before they know it. We'll look in the closet here. We'll get you some kind of a disguise. I believe Julian Eltinge left a wig in there." And you listen to all this stuff, you say, my God, how does he know all this stuff?
Yeah, because I think he was a dedic, that he picked up everything and used it.
Great eclectic mind. Really nice guy, too. It's a shame he got so hung up in dope, and so it's a shame he got so hung up on his wife.
Did you ever see Lord Buckley, before?
I did once.
What was that like?
Buckley was demented. He was insane.
My friend! Yeah.
He was an early Robin Williams.
Oh, but he had that whole language, everything going off. There's a great story about him and Lenny Bruce. You know that?
No, what?
They brought Lenny Bruce to see him, and they took him to this house. I guess maybe it was Chicago, maybe New York. The house was empty because they'd taken all the Buckley's furniture. They'd repossessed it. But he's sitting on a giant throne, getting head from this woman. And he said, "Pardon me, gentlemen, affairs of state." But it was like, he was treated himself. It was always members of the court. He made people Lord and Lady so-and-so, your Prince so-and-so, Lord, Lady so-and-so, and he made everybody members of the court if you followed him around when he performed. We now return control of the Internet to you, but fear not, Harlan will be back next week with more, much, much more.
This is Audible.
Blue Wolf Productions presents Robin Williams at Audible.com with Robin Williams and Harlan Ellison, Part 2.
Hey, we started last week with writer Harlan Ellison. We pick up now where we left off. I don't know, it's all so angry.
Do you believe that there are people who just come into the world cool?
Mm-hmm. Born cool.
Born cool.
The doctor smacks them and they go, "Take it easy. Don't cut that cord, I'm not finished. I'll just hear the lights. Can you dim the light? It's getting on me." Yeah,
were you ever a dweeb?
Yeah, big time. Heavy dweeb.
Yeah, where?
Hardcore. Oh, God. I mean, school, especially when going to the private school, this school with the blazer, the tie, the whole number.
You did that?
Oh, yeah, hardcore.
Where?
In Detroit, in a boys' school.
They have private schools in Detroit?
There's mainly Jewish, too. I went to 13 bar mitzvahs in 1 year. I got to know, I started to memorize, the whole, I knew the bar mitzvah service, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, and after a while they wanted to say, "Join." I can't, I'm sorry.
I used to love Detroit. I would go I had pals in Detroit, and I would just go up there, and I was involved in the most wonderful bar fight I've ever been in my life. In Detroit. Oh, it was, or was it Hamtramck? It was either Detroit or Hamtramck.
Well, Hamtramck is the big Polish community.
Oh, yeah, there was this. We went for barbecue. You know the House of Blue Lights.
Oh yeah.
I mean, most people don't even know about that. There's this great jazz tune called the House of Blue Lights, and it was a barbecue joint out in the edge of town, and it was real. And you would go there and just massive ribs, just die for the ribs, and just pig out completely. I mean, just submerge yourself in just meat on a stick, Jack. That's all it was. And it was when we were there one night, and there was this horrible scream horn alto sax player, and he was up on a little platform, and he going wee, one of those awful, Maynard, bad Maynard, sort of a Maynard Ferguson manqué, just all he knew was high notes. He would blow notes that would shatter cardboard.
Yeah, even like cats would go, "Oh!"
And we say, "God, please stop this guy." And they say, "Okay, we're going to take you to a cool place." They got really cool jazz. Cool jazz. We're going to take you to cool jazz. They take you to a place called The Cave. God knows where it is now. The Cave is, got to be gone. This is Fred Prophet, and it was Teddy Bear, a guy named Teddy Bear, and George Young, and all of this bunch of raffish truck drivers and pals that I knew. And they were all science fiction fans, but they all did real jobs. Like, today you go to a college and you ask people, you say, "What do you do for a living?" "Well, I'm a computer programmer. I'm a systems analyst. Don't any of you have a fucking honest job? Is there anybody here who earns a living with their hands?
You do something with your hands.
Give me a carpenter, for God's sake, a plumber.
Do you have a skill?
Well, all of these guys had the most. You know, they were bricklayers and boilermakers, and they worked on the assembly lines. But they were all science fiction fans, and they loved to talk about it. So here I come to town, and I was just a fan, for God's sakes. So they take me into Detroit. And we go to this joint called The Cave. We go downstairs, down. And it was down below everything, the pipes and the ceiling. Look like those weird scenes in Funny Face, you know. And goddamned if it wasn't the same sax player. The same guy blowing the same shit jazz. It was awful.
I gotta have 2 gigs, baby.
Well, and I don't drink, so I'm drinking lemonade or Coke, you know, whatever the hell it is. But we're sitting there listening to the music, and all of a sudden, at the bar, there were 2 Canadian soldiers who were wearing kilts. And it was a bar filled with, you know, horny-handed sons of toil, you know, guys with muscles in between their ears, and these were people who, for whom the idea of a thought was like a breeze blowing across a long, arid pampas, and they started ragging on these 2 guys, and they were just sitting there minding their own business, and the one guy said to him something like, you know, leave us alone, stop bothering us, we're not bothering you, just leave us alone. Oh, you don't want to be bothered. Oh, the lady don't want to be bothered. And he either swatted him across the back of the head or something. And these 2 guys stood up, and they were the equivalent of Rangers. They were British commando type kind of guys, and they were big, and they were well turned out. And they grabbed one guy. One guy grabbed him by the neck, and the other guy grabbed him by the ankles, and they bent him like a croquet wicket. Over a bar stool, just like that. The next thing I knew, the joint was a John Wayne bar fight, and people are punching each other and throwing things. And I ducked for cover under the. They had one of those skee ball things, you know, with the big puck, the big puck. I went underneath that boy. I got out of the way because I was a little fella and I didn't want to get hurt. And people are punching each other and throwing chairs through the back bar mirror. It was exactly like some crazed a John Ford movie. It was really insane. And I thought, well, what the hell? Why don't I get into this too? So I grabbed the puck from up above
and fling it.
I flang it. I hit some guy in the side of the head, knocked him slant over backwards. It hit the mirror, knocked 13 bottles off. It was amazing. We all ran for cover. The cops came. They dragged everybody in. We got out through the kitchen. It was a wonderful evening.
This is the life I never knew about you.
Oh, it was. And I wasn't even in college yet.
Serious?
No, I wasn't even in college. I think I was still in high school. And I was a science fiction fan from about 1950.
Who was your favorite writer when you were reading then? When you started off reading science fiction?
My favorite writer? Well, you're going to think this is insane.
No. Me? No.
Well, most of the ones who are my favorites, it's been a long time since they've written. Wallace West was one of my favorites. Wallace West wrote The Bird of Time. It was a wonderful story. But among my favorites was L. Ron Hubbard.
Serious?
This is long before he started doing Dianetics. L. Ron Hubbard was one of the best pulp writers in the country.
Serious?
I'm telling you, kid, you want to read a great book? Read Slaves of Sleep. Read Slan. Slan is the best novel about mutants ever written in the field.
Slan.
Slan. S-L-A-N. It's about a kid named Johnny Cross who is a mutant, and they chase him. He did a book called Final Blackout. The first edition of it is worth a fortune. Final Blackout is a small, thin book that was published in installments in Astounding Science Fiction, and it's after a nameless war. I mean, it's obviously a paradigm for World War I, but it's about the lieutenant, and he wanders through this war-blasted landscape trying to find civilization. It's brilliant. Hubbard was one of the most adept storytellers there ever was. I tell the story, but there are a dozen other science fiction writers who could tell the same story of different nights, because it happened a lot of times. It happened on a night I was still in high school. And I had come to New York, and I was hanging out with Lester Del Rey and Algis Budrys and Harry Harrison and all these people who belonged to the Hydra Club. The Hydra Club was a writers drinking and schmoozing society. They would get together once a week or once every 2 weeks in Jay Stanton's apartment, and which is down on First Avenue. And they would stand around and they would just talk. And there would be L. Sprague de Camp. There's a great story told about L. Sprague de Camp. L. Sprague de Camp is supposed to be this great writer of funny stories. He's one of the great everybody says, "Oh, he writes very funny stories," and he does. And they told me that one night they noticed Sprague, who's a tall, slim, very ascetic gentleman with a mustache. I mean, he looks like something out of a Louis Auchincloss novel, or the late George Apley. I mean, he really he's an elegant, well turned out man who speaks very precisely, very academically. And he had a pad and pencil, and he would stand behind a group of people who were talking, and he would be writing things down. So finally, after about 3 hours, people jumped him. They said, "Come on, Sprague, what the hell are you writing?" And they looked, and he had been writing down all of the funny things that people said because he wanted to figure out how humor worked. He didn't understand.
He was trying to analyze.
He was trying to analyze. He was trying to dissect it and put it. I mean, that's the kind of anyhow. So Hubbard was there. Now Hubbard was legendary among the pulp writers. He'd been writing pulp stories for years. Most of his biography was made up. It was, he created his own mythology about himself. But one of the things that was true about him was that he was one of the very first writers ever to have an electric typewriter. And he had one of those huge original
IBM Selectric? Before that.
I think it was even before an IBM Selectric. It was something like a big L.C. Smith. I mean, it was just gigantic. It was, if you tied it around someone's feet, you could put them in a bay and no one would ever find them. Forget about it. So, he tried to figure out a way to write faster because you were only being paid a penny a word, 2 cents a word, 3 cents a word. That was the max. That's all you got. The best markets paid 3 cents a word when you caught them. Didn't you know that?
No. They pay by the word.
They pay by the word, of course. That's the way I wrote. When I started writing in 1955, 56, I got paid a penny a word. I would sit up all night. I'd write a 3,000-word short story. I'd take it in the next day to Ziff Davis Publishing at 1 Park Avenue, and they would read it right on the spot, and Paul Fremlin would say, "Okay, I'll buy it and give me a voucher for $30. And I would take it down. I'd go and pay my rent. I was living in a $10 a week room. So $30 was 3 weeks. Yeah. But then in those days you could get a spaghetti dinner at Ronzoni's on Times Square. I was working on Times Square. I was working at the Broadway bookshop between the Victoria and Astor theaters. It was wonderful. That's when I got to see Gwen Verdon naked.
This alone is worth the price of
admission. No.
Woo!
Trust me, you don't want to go there.
Okay.
So I worked the shift. It was Broadway in those days was great because I worked the 6 o'clock in the evening shift till 3 in the morning. And after midnight was when all the interracial couples came out, was when all the real kookaboos and cadotes came out. It was a great time.
Oh, man, that must have been wonderful.
It was wonderful time. And right across the street was the Ronzoni Spaghetti House. And you could get a spaghetti dinner with 2 meatballs and bread and coffee or iced tea for $1. And it was, and I would eat there every night. And down the street pizza was 15 cents a slice.
Wow.
And I would go over to the flea circus and listen to Tiny Tim play his mandolin, except he wasn't called Tiny Tim then. He had another name.
And he was just starting?
He was just starting and
I believe.
It was great times. Oh, I was telling you about Hubbard with the typewriter.
Right.
To become faster, because he was only being paid a penny a word, 2 cents a word, 3 cents a word, he had attached to the wall, he worked against a wall, had a little table set against the wall. On the wall behind the table where the typewriter sat, he had installed one of those spindles that butchers have the brown paper on, a roll of brown paper.
Oh, yeah.
And he would roll the brown paper, the butcher's paper, into the typewriter and start typing. And when it got too much, he would rip it off with a T-square. He would rip it off and throw it behind him and keep typing. And that's how he would take the manuscript in. And that way he didn't have to stop to put paper in the typewriter.
So he's cranking at that point.
He was really cranking it, but he wrote a lot. He wrote not just science fiction, but he wrote westerns, he wrote mysteries, he wrote all kinds of stuff. But the novels, the fantasy novels, the Slaves of Sleep, the Triton that he did were wonderful, wonderful stuff. And Slan is Van Vogt. I'm sorry, Slan is Van Vogt. Slan is not Hubbard. Hubbard did a Final Blackout, Slaves of Sleep, the Triton, and about 24 others, but they're really well worth reading. Fear, he did a book called Fear.
What's that about?
Fear is the first psychological horror novel. It's literally about fear. He did one called Death's Deputy. He read somewhere that insurance adjusters had a table where they had lists of people to whom accidents don't happen, but everybody around them have accidents. And he called the guy a death's deputy. And he tells this, it's a wonderful story about this guy who wanders through life, and all around him people are dying and falling off buildings and all this shit. Beautiful book. He also did one called Typewriter in the Sky, where this guy realizes that his life is his life is being written by God in a dirty bathrobe, sitting on the edge of a bed with a typewriter. So, well, I got a mind full of this crap. It's
but it's incredible to hear all these connections. That I don't think people know.
He must have had a dozen pseudonyms, and the ones of the Kilkenny cats were written on the name Kurt von Ratchen. So I met this evening, and I'm just a high school kid, and I've come in from Cleveland, Ohio, for Christ's sake, and I'm in among the giants, for God's sakes, and I'm just sort of sitting there quietly, and Lester Del Rey, who was a very well-known writer, and subsequently became Del Rey Books, and blah 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 blah. Lester, in his childhood, had been a stump minister like Marjoe Gortner. He had been a revivalist. He was a child evangelist. And so Ron was complaining that he was breaking his ass writing, and he was never going to get, they would find him slumped over the typewriter one day. This is how, because there was no annuity, there's no insurance, there's no nothing, and you can't keep it up forever. I mean, I've been at it for 50 years, for God's sakes. I'm lucky still to be able to write. And these guys were sort of in sight of that, and they knew that they had to do something, and Ron said there's got to be a better way to make money. So Lester says, start a religion. That's the way to do it. Start a religion. And he said, and Ron said, yeah, not a bad. Now, what kind of a religion? Well, one guy contributed Reich's organ box. Another one came up with engrams, which were forgotten, lost memory, or whatever it was. And sure enough, Ron went ahead and he cobbled up Dianetics, and he wrote this book
because it has a little bit of all of that.
All of that stuff in it, and it took off, and he became very, very famous. And now, of course, he's a god, and you dare not say anything again. That this happened this way. But now other people have told me that they were at similar evenings where the same kind of thing happened. So I don't know whether my evening was the one or one of the ones, or whether it was the seed had already been planted. But when I told this story at Roddy McDowell's dinner, suddenly next to me, Julia McGinnis Johnson, this opera singer, went out of her Mesopotamian mind. So Roddy comes out. I was terribly shaken because I didn't want to be disrespectful to Roddy. I liked him a lot, and here I had ruined his goddamn dinner. So I'm sitting out on the veranda and just kind of shaking, and Roddy comes out and he sits down and he goes, oh my God. I said, you might have told me that she was a Scientologist, you jerk. And he says, I forgot.
That ended the party.
Oh yeah.
In a big way.
Yeah. Roddy called for days there after saying it wasn't your fault, but we were never invited back, and then he died.
Oh God, man. That's like the last party.
These things happen to me constantly. Oh. No matter where I go, some shit happens. I don't know what it is.
And then why did you get kicked out of college? What did you do?
Okay, so here's what happened. My dad died in 1949. We were living in Painesville, Ohio, a little town about 30 miles northeast of Cleveland. My dad dropped dead on a Sunday morning right in front of me. And it busted me up bad, but I didn't know it. I didn't realize it. I'd been a straight A student up to that point. Well, suddenly I started I couldn't get grades or anything. We moved to Cleveland, my mother and I, and she was working in the B'nai B'rith thrift shop. We had no money. I mean, we were pretty broke. Because my dad had died broke. He was a good guy, but never earned a lot of money, and he was a jeweler and a dentist. And anyhow, so the only school I could go to was a state school, which was Ohio State. So I go to Ohio State. And I was, and they paid for my tuition, but to pay for my room and my books and things like that, I was working at different jobs. I was a short order cook. I worked as a waiter in fraternity houses till I dumped a 20-gallon can of milk over one of the actives, and I didn't know quite what I wanted to do because I had been a singer, I had sung for a living, and I'd been an actor, and I'd been writing and doing all these things, but I wanted to write basically, and there was this writing class that I was in. Now Ohio State has a even at that time, which was 1953, had a population of 256 billion people. And the writing class had 6 people in it. 6 people. And it was run by a Dr. Shed.
Dr. Shed?
Dr. Shed, S-H-E-D-D, and in this class was one guy who was a Cro-Magnoid type, the sort of fellow whose knuckles scraped the ground as he walked.
Good.
So he was taking it just for credit. There was a young woman who, to my certain knowledge, never said a word, and you could pass your hand in front of her eyes, and all that would happen was you see the Doppler effect of your hand going past her head. And there was an old woman who wrote this astrological poetry, and here was me writing stories like a mad thing. I mean, I was doing a story a day, just sending them in, and they were all kind of fantasy and science fiction and weird stuff and Lovecrafty and stuff, because that's what I was interested in, and writing all of this stuff. And Shed would hand back the manuscripts with a C on it or a D on it or a nice paper or that kind of thing. And finally one time, this is the first of the four things that got me kicked out. All four of these things I'll tell you about happened all at the same time. Well, wait a minute. Should I tell you about the fraternity first? Yeah, my mother. Let me back up once. You remember Brother Theodore?
Oh, Brother Theodore, the greatest stage performer.
The greatest.
He's the one that said, "I may look like shit to you. That's because stage lighting is in its infancy."
I'll give you. You want to hear my imitation of Theodore? I love Teddy. Teddy and I met. He was one of the few people I ever wanted to meet. I mean, we're talking here a man in his 90s who was a brilliant monologist. He wasn't a comedian. He wasn't stand-up.
No, he just tell stories.
He would just tell stories. But he said once, and this is my imitation. Now you tell me if this is a good imitation of Brother Theodore. You know, David, I have been working on training rats. Yes, you can train a rat. Yes, if you take a rat and you work for days and months and years, you can train a rat. Of course, when you finish, all you have is a trained rat. I loved Teddy, and when we finally met, we hit it off instantly. I thought I was going to take him to dinner and we would chat for a while. We sat for 6.5 hours in Otto Penzler's drawing room, that great Sherlock Holmes drawing room in the Mysterious Bookshop in New York. Yeah. And we just couldn't stop talking. And his life was astonishing. Mm-hmm. Astonishing. He escaped from Nazi Germany. His wife, who was this gorgeous movie actress, fell in love with this syphilitic German director in Hollywood and left him. Oh, it was an amazing story. And we sat and we told each other's life stories to each other. And at one point, Teddy says to me, he says, Harlan, we are very much alike in one respect. And I said, what's that, Teddy? He said, well, women find us fascinating. When they meet us, they say, there is life here. There is vibrance. There is verve, zeal. I wish to know it. I wish to be with it. I wish to cleave to it. And it's good. And it's good for a month and 2 months and 3. And then when will he shut up? Will there be no end? Will he stop talking? And then they run shrieking from us into the street. And I fell apart.
Oh, man.
And my wife, my wife is the only person in my entire life, including my mother and father, who could bear to be in my company more than 2 hours without running screaming into the street.
Shying from the room.
Absolutely. So my mother, my poor dear mother, she was the sweetest woman in the world, and I adored her, but she didn't have a clue. It was as if these two pandas had given birth to a wolverine. They had no idea. I was in trouble from the day I was born. There was not a day of my life when I was not in some kind of hot water. I mean, just one thing after another. And my poor mother, she says to me when I go to college, she says, join a fraternity. Be with your own kind.
Your own kind?
Well, Jews.
A Jewish fraternity.
Right.
I'm looking for the one Jewish fraternity.
So when I got to Ohio State, I applied to work on the Ohio State Sundial, which was the humor magazine. And in the heyday of great college humor magazines, the Harvard Lampoon and the Dartmouth magazine, outstanding among them was the Ohio State Sundial, for which James Thurber had worked, Ruth McKinney had worked, Milton Caniff had worked, Gardner Ray, the great New Yorker cartoonist.
Right.
All of those people had worked for it. And I was the first freshman ever to work on the Sundial. So when I went around and they were pledging for the fraternities, they had all of these slope-browed, prognathous-jawed imbeciles who were football players or whose father owned a Westinghouse dealership in Toledo, Ohio, and they drove around in a red Cadillac convertible, and they had all these guys. So they needed some guy like me that they thought would raise the the point level. In the little did they know that I was going to bomb out completely. So I got pledged to ZBT, Zeta Beta Beta, the baby powder fraternity. And I was in it for one semester, and they hated me. Now, you got to understand something. I've been on the road since I was 13. So now I'm 18, 19, whatever the hell it is when you're in college. And these pissants, these little pussy willows, are saying to me, hey, you, shine my shoes. I said, hey, fuck you, go shine your own shoes. What, do you got a broken arm? So I was not terribly fraternal. So
this was not playing the game.
So they harassed me, and it was constant hell week for me all the time, and I didn't take any shit from anybody. And during midterms, I remember I was trying to study, and I finally got to sleep at about 2 a.m, and they came and they dragged me out of bed, and they made me go downstairs and clean out the garbage shed. And I flunked my test the next day. So the next night, same thing happened. I studied as long as I could, and I finally fell asleep over my desk. And here they came, these actives, all of them wearing ties and jackets, and they dragged me out onto the dorm rooms were on the 3rd floor of this fraternity house, which was up on a hill in Columbus, Ohio. And they took me out on the fire escape, and were going to take me down to the garbage shed to, clean out the garbage shed again. And one of these guys made the mistake of shoving me. And I grabbed him by the tie, and I threw him over the railing. I just yanked the tie, and he went right over the railing. He went right through the roof of the garbage shed. And the next day, they suggested that I leave the fraternity house because I wasn't a terribly fraternal fellow. So I went to live in
the game.
So I went to live in this rooming house, and it was tough times for me. I didn't like college. I didn't like it at all. So now I'm handing in these stories, and the Professor Shed is just, he obviously has nothing but disdain for me. He doesn't know what the hell I'm doing. He doesn't like the stories. They're obviously trash and garbage, and, I'm nothing. And finally, I confronted him, because that's the kind of hairpin I am. I confronted this kid, and I said, look, Dr. Shedd, I need you to give me an honest analysis of my work. Do I have any talent, for God's sakes? Now, you got to understand something. I had been publishing my own magazine at this point, my own fanzine. I'd been publishing it for 5 years, Dimensions. I had a subscribership of over 1,000 people, and everybody was writing me. Asimov and Heinlein, and all these people were writing for my magazine, and I was writing stories, and I was being mentored by Algis Budrys and Lester Del Rey and people like that. And I was not great, but I had some ability, for God's sakes. And he said to me, and this is not verbatim, but it was very much like this. He said, "You have no talent. You have no talent. You will never have any talent." He said, "You cannot write." He said, "If you persist in batting your wings against the window like a moth, you will only come to no good." He said, "If anybody should ever read anything you write, they would never buy it. If a miracle should be passed and they buy it, it would not stand the test of time. You are no good. You have no talent." And he said, "I understand you're minoring in geology. You probably have rocks in your head. Why don't you go ahead and do that?" And I hit him. I hit him as hard as I could possibly hit him. Now, I'd been on the road for a lot of years, and I may not have been terribly muscular. That didn't come till the Army. But I knew that when you hit somebody, you don't hit to them, you hit beyond them. And I hit right to the back of his head, and I got to his jaw doing about 180 miles an hour and knocked him right on his ass. That was the first thing.
That'll work.
The second thing is I got arrested for shoplifting.
What were you stealing?
I was stealing records, and they caught me, and they threw me in the slam in Columbus, Ohio, and that was the second thing. The third thing was, because I'd been on the road since I was young, I knew nothing about girls. I never kissed a girl till I was 19. I never got laid till I was 20, and I got married at 21. So here I am in college, and I somehow or other got this date for there were 3 big dances. There was the homecoming dance, the something or other dance, and the military ball, which was put on by the ROTC people. And I somehow managed to get this date with Mona Green.
The goddess.
Oh, Mona Green to die. And what she was doing with an asshole like me, I have no idea. But I called my mother and I begged her, "Mama, please let me take the bus to Cleveland. Let me get the car. Let me have the car for the weekend." And she said, "Okay." I took the Greyhound to Cleveland from Columbus. I got the car. I drove it back. I figured if I got a car, maybe I'll get lucky. Who the hell knows? So for some reason that I cannot parse, I drove my car, my mother's car, up the long walk at Ohio State University and onto the statue of William Oxley Thompson. Why I did that and who the hell William Oxley Thompson was, I'll never be able to tell you. And the guard, there was a campus cop who came after me, old guy, very, very fat, and he chased me, and he had a heart attack, and he fell down. He didn't die, but the poor man, he fell down.
At this point now, you've decked the professor?
That's the 3. Now, the fourth one was, I had the lowest, probably to this day.
The lowest grade point average?
Lowest grade point average in the history of Ohio State University.
Negative?
4 point, well, damn close. 4 point is straight A's.
Right.
Right? I had .084. which is 3 X's, 2 F's, and a question mark. I don't know.
How do you get a .084? What I want to know is how did you get .084? So what was the .084? What did you do that good? I mean, what was the 8.084 for?
I attended.
I showed up. That's the credit for your body.
I showed up.
That's essentially for your fluids.
Well, they booted me out. And I stood there. It was in February. And I stood there in the snow on High Street looking at the university, and I had with me the little cardboard box that I sent my dirty laundry home.
Yeah.
You know? And I stood there and I shook my fist at them and I said, I'll be back! I'll be back, motherfuckers! I'll be back! And you'll see. Well, years later, when I was on a lecture tour of Ohio, I'm in the middle of the week and I get a call from the agent. He says, Ohio State would like you. Can you work them in? I said, sure. They paid double. And I was making some ridiculous figure like $3,000 or $4,000. Now I get $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 a night. But then I was making maybe $3,000. They paid $6,000. And when I got up to do my evening, the joint was jammed. It was the hall was filled and the balcony was filled. And I started out by saying, I used to go to school here, folks. Now, I suppose I could tell you about the train that the fraternity boys at ZBT used to pull on the poor half-witted girl who came in from town, and 16 or 20 of them would use her up and then give her $1.50 and send her home on the bus. I said, or I could tell you about the Jewish quota in the medical school so that my friend Don Epstein, who had 4-point, couldn't get in, and he went to dental school and couldn't get in that quota either. So then he went to the taxidermist school and finally wound up in vet school and changed his name to Don Forrester and married a Shiksa. I could tell you about that. And I went on, man, in this vein for about 2 hours. Without drawing a breath, talking about Ohio State and about this joint is so goddamn stupid. The only reason you can get thrown out of this place is if you miss a forward pass. And I went on at great length. And then suddenly at some point or other, it was as if I opened my mouth and the dove of peace flew out. It was an epiphany. I said, free at last, thank God Almighty, I am free at last. And I went ahead and I did 2 hours of a regular lecture.
So you spoke for 4 hours?
4 hours, and when I got done, they wouldn't pay me. We didn't bring you in here to disrespect our university. We're not going to pay you. I said, oh, that's fine. And I said, don't pay me. I said, I'm sure that Cynthia Robbins, who's standing right here of the Columbus Dispatch, and you notice she has her pad out. She's going to love to run the headline. OSU refuses to pay poor little Kike. And
I've never seen that headline.
No.
Kike dissed by.
They paid me very, very quickly. In fact, I wouldn't leave the auditorium until they went and got a check. And to this day, I will not give a lecture unless I have the check in my hand before I speak.
You have no choice.
If you have the mind,
yes,
it happens.
It works for you. What is your favorite story that you've written? The one that you it's like asking someone, pick your favorite child, but it's like,
yeah.
But what is
I've got
the one?
1,700 stories. I got 74 books. So when people ask me that, I usually say it's the story I'm writing now, which is called Incognita Inc., as in Terra Incognita.
Right.
And the concept is this. If you look at the movie King Kong,
right,
they got this map. This map of Skull Island that was found with a Lithuanian seaman who was found in a bark floating out in the middle of the Sargasso Sea, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the map to Atlantis. Or Arnie Saknussemm has a map to the center of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Who makes these fucking maps? Who's the cartographer who makes these maps?
So there is a place where they've...
Well, this is the story about this little map shop in Old Town in Chicago with this little guy, this Dickensian shop, where the guy does and it's the day when the corporation that bought the shop comes to fire him, because now they've got
GPS locators.
GPS locators. They don't need him anymore. And it's the guy who comes to tell him that he has to be, they're going to give him a nice severance package because he's been working there for 400 years, and they're going to give him a nice little severance package, but I'm sorry, we don't need you anymore, and he's come to fire him. The guy who's letting him go, it turns out, is a guy that he had been at this shop 30 years before when he was a little boy. He had won a bronze medal in a kite flying contest. It was the only thing he'd ever won, and he had lost the bronze medal, and he went to this map shop, and the map shop said, we have maps to anywhere. And he said, can you give me a map to my heart's desire, which is my little bronze medal? And the old man gave him the map, and he found his bronze medal. And now he's been picked by this company to fire this guy, and he's really upset about it. And he lets him go, and it's being told by this guy. It's being narrated by this guy, and he says, my heart was breaking, and I knew I was quitting the company. I would never, fuck them. I would never do their dirty work for them again. And he said, and I watched the old man. He had a carpet bag, and he walked out on the street, and he started to turn to the left to walk, and a woman stopped him and said, "Excuse me, can you tell me where the supermarket is?" And he says, "Yes, you go wait a minute, I'll draw you a map."
Oh, that works.
Is that great?
That's really lovely.
I love that. It's so...
That's a very...
People say, "Where do you get your ideas?" I always say Schenectady. They say, "What?" I say, "Yeah, there's this idea service in Schenectady."
You knock on the door then.
Send them $25 a week. They send me a fresh 6-pack of ideas every week without fail. And there's always some schmuck after the lecture comes up and says, "Can I have the address of that idea service?" You get an idea, and the idea comes like with you, with a shtick you're going to do.
Yeah,
you say, "What a funny idea. Who makes the maps? Where do these the maps come from suddenly for Atlantis and Mu and Eden and Utopia and all these things?" And then you say, "Okay, but that's just an idea. That's not a story. That's not a story. The story is who makes the maps? What's his life like? What's going to happen to him? Why are you telling his story? And a short story is always that pivot moment. It is that burning moment in which you see everything that went before and everything that will follow thereafter. And it's that linchpin moment. And to tie that up, you have to have the point. And the point, of course, is what makes it a story. And for months and months and months, maybe years, the idea sat there and I couldn't do anything with it. And I knew exactly what I wanted to write. I knew what the guy looked like. I could see him in my head. This Dickensian little shop with him sitting on a stool. And,
like those ones in England with the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. Drawing his little maps but I couldn't figure out an ending. Also, I couldn't figure out viewpoint. And then one morning I was taking a shower. I get great ideas in the shower. That's where I get ablution. For some reason, I run scenarios. I do all the parts myself. It's like you, in the different voices. And I'm talking, and I do the whole scenario. And I suddenly I said, "Oh, that's what it is. It doesn't have to be yes, and he was carried off in a blaze of light to him."
No.
Here, let me draw you a map. That's a spam, and it just killed me.
It's just like bing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the simplest stuff. Like the simplest and the most powerful. This is a good thing.
You know, we don't get to sit and talk like this anymore.
That's why I love doing it. That's why today's been good.
Yes.
God willing.
Oh, okay.
Oh, boss.
Well, now, listen, it was wonderful seeing you, Rob. You come on back now sometime soon.
I'm going to take some toasters. Give Harlan a gift here. He's got every goddamn story ever made.
I'd like the mangle. My mother had a mangle. It was in the front yard for a long time.
It's a sweet thing. Take some gifts, and we're done right now. We did our time. It's time to also say to everybody, you know what we're doing.
Oh, God, we did it, Ike.